Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. I brought home a souvenir from Egypt. Now my cat is talking to me. A week after I got back from my trip to Egypt, my cat, Richard, started talking to me. "Hello, Ivan," he said after I walked into the apartment after work. "Hi, Richard," I said. Then I realized what just happened, though, and I dropped my laptop on the floor. "Did you just talk?" "I did." "How is that possible?" "I'm not sure." Richard. And I sat on the couch and tried to figure out what had happened. I'd recently returned from a work trip to Cairo. While walking through Khan El-Khalili Bazaar, a wooden statue caught my attention. The statue was a foot tall and depicted a mummified man standing with his arms crossed over his chest. Though it felt unexpectedly heavy in my hands, almost warm despite the cool air. The detail in the man's face was incredible. I could even see the small wrinkles around his eyes. He almost looked real. I asked the vendor how much the statue cost. I worried he'd say hundreds, but when told me he only wanted $20. I bought the statue and took it home as a souvenir. I put it on my TV stand next to my TV. "I've felt strange ever since you brought the statue home," Richard said. "Do you think it has something to do with why you can talk now?" "I've always had thoughts, but when you brought the statue home, I started thinking in English. I've never thought in English before. I never wanted to speak, either, but now I do." The person who sold me the statue said it was an Ushebdi statue. He said they're usually found in tombs, but this statue had been carved by a local. It was art, not a piece of history. I picked up the statue and looked at it more closely. The wood felt oily. I noticed tiny cracks running the wood, too, like veins and layers of light and dark red coloring that shifted in the light. Maybe the statue was much older than I thought it was. It took a while for me to get used to Richard being able to talk, but once I got over the shock of it, I enjoyed our conversations. I didn't have any friends. Usually after work, I just go home and play games, or watch TV. I still did that, but now I had someone else to talk to. Richard would ask me all kinds of questions about the world, and I'd do my best to answer him. "Why do dogs hate us so much?" "I don't know," I said. "I've never really thought about it. I guess they just do." "And if I eat this pizza, I'll get sick?" "Your stomach wasn't made for it. Cats need to eat raw meat." At first, Richard seemed happy to spend time with me, too. As the weeks went on, though, he became irritated by my behavior, and he started criticizing me. "Why don't we go out for a walk?" he asked. "I'm tired. I don't feel like walking. Every day you come home, and you sit on the couch. You never do anything. You're so lazy." Another time, I ordered pizza 2 nights in a row, and Richard gave me a look of pure disgust. "How can you eat like this?" he asked. "I don't feel like cooking." "Then order a salad. Order anything healthy for once." I began to resent Richard. I went out of my way to avoid him, instead of coming home after work. I took his advice and started going to the gym. I lost nearly 20 pounds. Richard started going out more, too. Each morning, before I left for work, he'd ask me to open the window. He'd spend the day exploring Chicago, not coming home until much later that night. Sometimes not until the next day. "What are you doing?" I asked him. "Learning about the world," he said. The way he was acting made me feel uncomfortable. I don't know exactly what it was. If it was how he talked or how he reacted to me. He didn't just seem resentful anymore. He seemed hateful. He seemed like he wanted to hurt me and hurt other people in the world, too. It was like he felt better than all of us, and the rest of us needed to be brought up to his standards. In my free time, I started to research Ushebdi statues. I learned that the Ushebdi were magical servant statues buried with the dead. They awaken in the afterlife and perform work on behalf of the deceased, stepping in like their clone. I tried talking to Richard about what the statue might be doing to him, but he wouldn't listen to me. He just mocked me. You think this statue has somehow possessed me? He asked. Cats don't just start talking. Something is going on. Did you ever think maybe I'm just smarter than other cats? You're talking, Richard. You're reading Plato and Aristotle and Livy's History of Rome. That's not normal. I decided to try an experiment. One night, while Richard was gone, I took the statue down in my car. When Richard came home later that night, he was furious. He immediately woke me up, jumping on my bed and hissing my face. "Where is it?" he yelled. I threw it out. "Then go get it." "Or what?" "I'll make you regret it." He'd never threatened me before. I believe his threat, too. He'd do whatever he could to hurt me. I got the statue from my car and put it back beside my TV again. From then on, though, I kept my distance from Richard. Truthfully, I was scared of him. I had no idea what he was capable of. "The people in this city are so boring," he told me. "Every day, I've been watching them do the same things again and again. No ambition, no dreams, nothing. Just millions of people wasting away, wasting their lives." I'd finally had enough of him. "And what are you doing with your life?" I asked. "If ambition is so important to you, maybe you should go live somewhere else." "Are you kicking me out?" "I think we'd both be happier if you didn't live together anymore." Richard agreed. I offered to help him move. Wherever he wanted to go, I'd find a way to get him there. He thanked me, but then he asked for some time to think about what he wanted to do next. It was that same night the nightmare started. I dreamt I was lying in my bed when two rotten arms reached up through my bed sheets and dragged me downward through the bed and into an ocean of black water. I flailed my limbs, struggling to breath, as I sank deeper and deeper. I sensed other things around me, watching me, not people, something else. Spirits, demons. Their yellow eyes lit up the darkness. I woke in my bed, covered in cold sweat, my heart beating painfully fast. Richard sat at the edge of my bed, watching me with the same yellow eyes. "What are you doing here?" I asked him. "I heard you scream. I came to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine." I wasn't fine, though. I was even more frightened than before. I was desperate for help. Too. What if whatever had taken control of Richard's mind really wanted control of me? During my research into the Ashebdi statue, I came across a profile of a professor at the University of Chicago, Dr. Sarah Chun, an expert in Egyptology. I reached out to her by email, explaining what happened and attaching a video of Richard talking to me. Dr. Chun agreed to meet me for coffee on the university campus. She arrived at the cafe with her hair tied in a ponytail, her eyes very visibly strained, and her hands smeared with blue ink. "You swear that video is real?" she asked. "It isn't AI or Photoshop or something like that?" "It's 100% real. My cat can talk. He's been talking to me ever since I brought that statue home. His behavior has changed, too. At first, he was kind friendly. Now, though, he acts like he wants me dead. If what you say is true, I believe the Ashebdi statue you brought home from Egypt had a spirit trapped inside of it. A spirit." She nods. Wealthy people were buried with hundreds of these statues. The dead person's spirit was supposed to bring these statues to life to perform work on their behalf. Maybe that's what happened. Whoever was buried with that statue, their soul has awakened it to accomplish something here. What would the spirit want? Power and wealth, possibly. Religious favor. Legacy and memory. She sipped her coffee and thought for a moment. If the statue has caused this problem, though, maybe destroying the statue would fix it. How do I destroy it? That's not really my area of expertise, but if I were you, I would burn it. Don't put out the fire until every bit of the statue is turned to ash. And you're sure that would help? No, but I don't know what else you can do. On my way home from university, I stopped at the store and bought an axe, a lighter, and some lighter fluid. I had everything in the trunk of the car, so Richard wouldn't see it. At home, Richard sat in the windowsill in the living room, flicking his tail. He seemed to know something was wrong. "Why didn't you go to work today?" he asked. "I wasn't feeling well." "Then why didn't you stay home?" "I had a few errands to run. It was just a fever." I tried walking to my room, but Richard jumped in front of me. You smell different. Someone's perfume. Who are you talking to? Nobody. Just a few cashiers. Maybe it's one of their perfumes you're smelling. Maybe. I walked around him, sat on my bed, and turned on my bedroom TV. Every now and then, I'd look at the door. I could see Richard pause moving as he paced back and forth. Are you staying home tonight, too? I asked him. It's a little cold tonight. Have you thought any more about where you'd like to live next? I have a few ideas. I'll let you know soon. Later, I opened my door crack. I didn't see him. I hoped he was sleeping. I tiptoed toward the TV and then picked up the Ashepti statue. Richard lunged at me, hissing, "Don't you dare touch it." His claws dug into my face, ripping the skin. I grabbed onto him and threw him back onto the couch. Then I picked up the statue and ran out of my apartment, slamming the door shut behind me. "You'll regret this," he screamed. I ran downstairs and got into my car. I could feel the blood dripping down my cheeks. Thank God he hadn't clawed my eyes. Where can I burn the statue? I wondered. There's on going back now. I drove around aimlessly for an hour, but then I headed toward Chicago's South Side and parked in an alleyway next to an empty, graffiti-covered warehouse. I looked around and didn't see anyone else. I got out of the car and opened the trunk. In the distance, someone screamed, and I spun around. I was still alone, though. Nothing but buildings and shadows. The smoke from the smokestacks twisting through the sky. I took out the axe and the lighter fluid. I swung the axe down on the statue, cutting it in half. Lightning flashed across the sky. In the distance, police sirens wailed. I covered the two broken pieces of the statue with lighter fluid and set them on fire. As soon as the flames lit up, the silence was ripped apart by a terrible scream. Rain began pouring from the sky. My hands shook as I covered the flames with my jacket, protecting the flames until they'd grown large enough that the rain could no longer stop the statue from burning. I watched as the wood turned to ash, and then as the wind blew the ashes away. That awful statue was gone forever. Please be over. I hoped. Please let Richard be okay. The rain began falling harder. I got back in my car and drove back home with my windshield wipers squeaking loudly against the glass. Inside my apartment, all the lights were off. I turned the lights on. In front of the TV, blood was splattered on the carpet from where Richard had cut me. Finally, I saw him. He jumped off the couch and meowed. "Richard?" I asked, "Are you okay?" He meows again. I got on my knees. He walked towards me, and I pet his head. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" He sat purring. I looked at his eyes. His eyes looked less yellow, too. "I love you, Richard," I said. He walked to his water bowl and licked his water. It was finally over. I sat on the couch and turned on the TV. Richard jumped on my lap, and I started petting him again while he purred. But then, suddenly, icy fingers grabbed onto my shoulders. Before I could turn to see who it was, I was violently dragged backwards over the couch, my shins slamming into the coffee table. I clawed at the carpet as I was pulled across the floor and into the bedroom. "Help!" I screamed. The bedroom door slammed shut behind me. In the darkness, whatever had grabbed me threw me onto the bed. Two yellow's eyes appeared in front of my face. "You pathetic little man," it hissed. I pressed its cold hands into my chest. My heart froze. The bed turned to water, and then I began to fall through that same cold black water again. "Let go of me," I yelled, and I tried to fight my way back to the surface before I drowned. Then I heard Richard scratching at the door, trying to get in. The sound cut through the nightmare. Suddenly I could feel my bed beneath me again. I was gasping, soaked in sweat, but breathing air instead of that horrible water. I went to the door and opened it. Richard looked up at me and meowed. The apartment lights began to flicker. I picked up Richard and carried him downstairs to my car. I drove around in circles the rest of the night, afraid to go back home. "Have you been back to the apartment?" Dr. Chen asked me. "Richard and I stayed at a hotel for next week," I said, "but then I started to run out of money, so we went home. Our first night there after what happened was a little frightening, but the apartment seems normal now. You haven't noticed anything strange?" Every now and then when I'm sleeping, I'll wake up to a loud noise, but I think it's just my imagination. Honestly, I'm starting to wonder if I imagined this whole thing. But you have the videos. Those have changed, too. Look at this. I take out my phone and play one of the videos for her. Richard looks at the camera and meows. You heard him talking before, right? I did. Well, whatever proof I had is gone. And Richard hasn't talked since you destroyed the statue. He hasn't said a word. Then destroying the statue must have worked. After saying goodbye to Dr. Chen, I drove home and ordered a pizza for dinner. Richard and I sat together on the couch, watching TV. He looked up at me and I pet his head. I'm happy things are back to normal now. But at night, while Richard sits at the edge of my bed, I can't help but wonder what he's thinking about and how much of we would before is still him. Sometimes I wish I could get rid of him, but he's my cat. He's been my cat for 7 years. I can't just abandon him. I couldn't live with myself. Story 2. I'm a grave digger, and I can't dig the dead deep enough in the ground to hold them. Does anyone know about this weird plague that broke out in the Old West? I've tried reading up on it, but the history books don't mention anything. Uncle Ray loved his spaghetti westerns, loved anything to do with the Old West. In fact, he was buried with a VHS of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So when I found that my inheritance consisted of 200 books on cowboys and the American frontier, I wasn't surprised. What had piqued my interest, however, was something slipped into the sleeve of one of the books. It was a journal entry. I'm not an expert, but it looks old and the way it reads might be genuine, but it's tough to say. I worry because it describes an Old West that I didn't think existed. Here's the journal entry. Maybe someone can tell me if it's genuine. Walker McCoy was the measure of how stubborn the dead could be. He was buried at 22 feet in some nowhere prairie just outside of Greer County on October 4th, 1867. 2 days later, a group of Indians found his severed arm, identifiable only by a trashy signet ring. That limb had been scrambling amongst the brush, squeezing the guts out the ass and mouth of a field mouse. We hadn't a clue where the rest of Walker had gotten to, but that crook's arm went back into the ground at 30 feet the very next day. That's why you should never ride idly if you happen upon the double crosses. We do as good a job as we can given the circumstances, but there's only so far down a shovel can go, and the dead are getting mighty restless lately. On a sunny day, the flattened tin cans pinned to the sidewalks flash like a trout. Still, no amount of metal on the ground could make Mangum shine. It was a beat-up town pulled this way, and that until its arms swung loose from their sockets. It was neither here nor there. It wasn't ours or theirs. A place secured only by a promise. Wyatt sat outside the post office, whistling a broken tune and watching Nellie Rose brush down her mare. My brother always had a song in him when that girl was around, like all the other guys in town. Such a shame she'd never look his way. Just as well, Wyatt had been digging graves for so long he'd taken on the form of a tombstone. He was a pale, lumbering slab of a man that cast the darkest of shadows. Eyes back in your head, I said, slapping him on the shoulder with a roll of posters I'd picked up. Nellie Rose doesn't want a man so acquainted with the dead. Dutch, I was just... He cleared his throat and pushed a hand through his sweat-slick hair. Admiring her horse, that's all. I grunted, then hitched up a seat next to him. Are those all the second-timers? Wyatt said, nodding at the posters. He lit up a smoke, took a long drag, then blew out a big, obnoxious cloud up into the sky. I frowned at him in silence until he stubbed the bastard out and apologized. Yep, these are them. Looks like a lot. How many? 12. Wyatt looked at me. 12. Yep. He blew out a sigh, then relit his smoke. Surprised we ain't had people demanding their money back. I grunted again. I swiped the cigarette from his hand, took a drag of my own, then passed it back. I guess that's why we round them back up. He nodded absently. His gaze fell back on the girl. Still no sign of Walker? Nope. But if he was on Indian land, we'd know by now. Is that good news? I shrugged. stood up and squinted down the high street. I watched passers-by mill about in the dust clouds kicked up by the horses and carts, the murmuring of midday crowds and the rattle of shoes on the tin-pressed sidewalks, the men slumped in chairs outside the saloon bar with empty bottles pinched in their hands, the smell of scorched earth and sweat. It was a scent that never quite left a Mangum resident, even if they laid plenty of distance and time between them and the town. Some folk called it a souvenir, most called it curse. Though, with the way things were lately, I think too many people carelessly throw that word around. I mean, it was just a town, a nowhere place full of nowhere people, all stooped and wild-eyed beneath the unforgiving sun. Shit, I know Mangum wasn't much, but it was home. And I'd sooner ride into hell than see my town overrun by either Indians or the dead. Anyways, let's go, I said, helping Wyatt up to his feet. He brushed off some dirt on his trousers, pulled out his gun, inspected the chambers, and holstered it again. Where are we headed first? Same place as always. I said, where the holes are. We'd buried Hattie Sinclair last winter at 24 feet. The poor girl was 15 when she hit the dirt. Her back was bent out of shape after a fall from a horse. Mr. Sinclair needed extra convincing to lay his daughter to rest. He wanted to hold out until the spring. The ground a little hungrier then, and doesn't tend to spit people back up. But everyone knows a body doesn't keep long under the Mangum sun. At the time, I thought we'd put enough mud down, but it turned out that Hattie had gotten a bit itchy a couple of weeks back, and was now stalking cattle down by the Salt Fork. That's why Wyatt and I rode out so close to the double crosses. We owed Hattie's daddy an apology. We followed the Salt Fork most of the way, every now and then sweeping the valley for anything strange. But the land was still. All that moved was the Salt Fork, which trembled beneath the sun, its ragged clay bluffs burning red like a wound. The land was silent, except a couple of crows that cawed mockingly from overhead. After a couple of hours, we found what we were looking for. Blood everywhere, Wyatt said, bringing his horse to a trot and swiping the flies from his face. His shirt was already clinging wetly to his back. Our girl must be close, I said, nodding at the pried-open ribcage of a cow. Its innards were now just a vicious red smear across the dirt. Squinting against the sun, I could see the cow's spine beyond a small thicket. I almost mistook it for a snake basking in the sand. A little further on, an undiscernible lump of meat that I assumed to be the creature's head. Then, where the dust met the sky, an old barn house loomed. It appeared to be held up with the trees growing through it. I looked to Wyatt, who was circling the disemboweled cow. He cocked his head, then blew out a sharp whistle. I pulled my horse up alongside him to see what had caught his eye. As soon as I saw it, my hands went slack on the reins, and an oily fear churned about in my guts. Fuck. Curled up inside the carcass of that cow was a fresh body, a child, a small bundle of bones draped in lumps of drooling meat and ragged strips of skin, Indian skin. And in that poor boy's contorted mouth was the other dismembered hand of our friend, Mr. McCoy, wrist deep to the teeth, fingers still scratching at the back of the kid's skull, Walker's crooked brand still visible on the gray meat of his forearm. I wheeled my horse round, bag him up, and find somewhere to bury him. I'll get the girl. Then I set off at a gallop toward the barn, hoping that we hadn't completely fucked the whole town. Walker, that stubborn bastard. Why wouldn't he just stay dead? The barn was no longer what I'd call a building. If it wasn't for the roof and the branches of a nearby tree, I doubt the walls would stand at all. Long ago, someone had once painted the wooden panels in red. Since then, seasons had come and gone. Now, the paint had blistered into rosettes of sun-starched pink. Each peeked through the lattice of vines that wrapped their way around the barn's exterior. It was almost beautiful. 2 large doors were barricaded by a long plank of wood, though that didn't matter, as a large hole yawned open down the left flank of the structure, revealing a room crowded with shadows. I ducked my head to get a better look inside, and noticed a crimson streak snaking along the floor. I checked my gun was loaded, and used the barrel to tear away a dusty curtain of cobwebs, then entered the building. Death was on the air, heavy and sickly sweet. I scanned the room to see wooden crates and tool blades rusted into bubbled orange. A wooden ladder rose up into the hayloft. I stepped towards it, then froze. A sound, brief as a breath, and quiet like a dying man's sigh. My eyes snapped to a dark corner of the barn. A shape had peeled away from the shadows. I cocked my gun and hunkered down behind an old wooden barrel. I watched as a small figure shambled about in the darkness. Hattie! She must have torn out her throat somehow, because each breath sounded like a peculiar sob. Peering around my cover, I cocked my gun and trained on the movement in the gloom. Make it clean, Dutch. The girl's gotta still look like her poster when you haul her back to town. Placing my finger on the trigger, I squinted down the barrel, steadied my breath, and waited for her to move into my sight. The figure lurched forward, breaking away from the shadows, and just as I was about to blow that son of a bitch away, I lowered my gun. It wasn't Hattie. No, the shape that staggered out from the darkness was alive. Another Indian kid, a girl, maybe 8 or 9, definitely older than the boy and the cow. She was all beat up and covered in blood. A ragged tear ran across her face from ear to chin. A thick slab of flesh had peeled away from her cheek and flapped limply with each uneasy step. She was struggling to suck in a full breath, her body shuddering with shock. I raised the gun again, fixed the girl in my sight, my finger loitering over the trigger. Quick and easy. It was the right thing to do. The girl's eyes lazily slid around in her head and then locked onto me. They widened and she began to scream and sob. The girl dropped to her knees and threw up her hands, mumbling words I could not understand. But the gesture was clear. She was pleading to me, praying that I'd spare her life, that I'd save her. I holstered my gun and slowly approached the blubbering wreck. Hands on my hips, I blew out a sigh and frowned down at her. Who cared if she was Indian? The kid was too damn young to have so much fear in her. Crouching down, I tried to catch her eye. Then, when it was clear that she was too scared to look up, I reached out to, I don't know, shake her out of the shock she was in. But she flinched, clambered backward, and pressed up against a wooden crate. The Indian whimpered and wheezed as she struggled to catch a breath. Blood bubbled out the hole in her cheek. Her eyes, wild and wide, fixed on me. No, a place beyond me. A soft, uneasy padding sound came from behind me, warm and wet air blowing against the back of my arm. My heart started knocking about in my chest. I didn't intend to let them get this close. That's why Wyatt and I spent so much time down at the shooting range. Distance was your only friend against these ghouls. Rookie move, Dutch. You stupid son of a bitch. A low, guttural moan rose up from behind, sending a shudder down my spine. I slipped my hand down to my holster and slowly drew out my gun. All the while, I watched the fear in the Indian's eyes. "Hi, Hattie," I said under my breath. "Hi, Hattie." It echoed with a voice like dirt. "She can talk?" I turned, raised my gun up, and shot. Her head wasn't quite where I'd expected it to be. While my bullet kicked up some hay at the back of the barn, Hattie stood about a yard or two away. Her back was crooked and snapped sideways. Her sheared spine jutted out of the top of her churned-up hips like a bison's tooth in an upturned grave. Her upper body had folded in on itself, so that her head knocked against her left hip, and both wrists scraped along the floor. That face, it had once belonged to a child. It had once been the reason for Clint and Jude Sinclair to get out of bed every morning. But now, she looked like leather held to the flame, all cracked and black with rot. Her mouth was gulping like a land-bound fish. Her eyes were dull and gray like tarnished steel. Hattie's lips slowly peeled up and away from her teeth and gums as she opened her jaws wide. The gray skin of her face loosely bunched up beneath her eyes like fabric caught in a sewing machine. Then she let out a crackling howl and lunged at me. Hattie's upturned torso swung wildly on a tangle of tendons and muscle tissue at her waist. Her arms swiped at my side, grabbing a fistful of my shirt. She hooked a finger into my flank, digging deep into my chest and curling around with my ribs. I got a shot off and blew a hole in Hattie's arm. A wet lump of meat peeled back and flailed around like a muddied rag as we wrestled against one of the barrels. My shirt had started to become wet and red. That finger was still stubbornly clasped around my bone. I felt her other hand fumbling about my knee, trying to get a good handful of my pants. I took the gun and began hammering down on Hattie's hand. But the angle was awkward. Hattie didn't bat an eye. My other hand was making wild swipes as she'd now gotten a hold of my leg. Another gnarled finger pressed into me. I screamed and tried to push her away. But Hattie was strong and relentless. The finger tore open my skin and wriggled its way into the soft tissue at the back of my knee. She clumsily plucked at a tendon, sending a severe shudder through my leg and making it buckle. We both hit the floor. My gun tumbled out of my hand. Hattie's got spilled out of her hips all over me. A wet tangle of rubbery ropes pressed between us. Juices pooled out and soaked my shirt, getting into my face, my mouth. The smell of rot hit me hard. I wanted to be sick, gagging and sputtering up phlegm. Shit! I cried. Another sharp fingernail tore at my flank and ripped a dirty hole in me. Then she pushed another squirming finger inside. Hattie's fingers dug deeper, coiled around the rubbery threads of my knee and slowly pulled. Harder and harder. Then snap, my leg folded on its own accord. A pain lanced through me like a cut from a rusty blade. Bile purged up my throat and rolled about in my mouth like a thick, fiery slug. I spat it out onto Hattie's dirt-matted hair in a pathetic act of defiance. I grabbed at the hand attempting to excavate my chest and desperately tried to pull it free, but with each tug, Hattie's grip around my rib grew tighter. Her hand was now knuckles deep in me. It was no use. I'd have to try another way. Or else, maybe if I was off my back, I could break away. I rocked my body, kicked off a nearby wooden crate with my good leg. Hattie resisted, tried to hold me down, but I kicked out again and managed to shift my weight enough to roll us over. Shit, Hattie hissed. Her mouth gargled with hatred. She snapped those tombstone teeth at my stomach, yet bit down on nothing but air. I coughed out a laugh, already thinking myself a winner. Then she showed me how dire my circumstances truly were and twisted her fingers around inside my chest. Then she pinched on something and pulled. A half-gas trapped in my throat and my body recoiled with the pain. Pink and blue lightning flashed at the edges of my vision. Glancing down at the wound in my chest, I noticed something odd. Between Hattie's fingers and thumb was a glistening crimson bulb that was now protruding from between my ribs. It looked like my chest had blown a huge bubble. She gave it another twist. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't fucking breathe. I swiped wildly at her hand, started prizing her fingers away from the flesh she'd excavated from me. But her grip, it was so tight. And my fingers, they were so slippery with her rotten offal in my blood. Another vicious tug. My vision flashed white, and vomit lurched up my throat, burning like a stab from a cattle prod. My hand still fumbling, still failing me. I was going to pass out. I was going to die. Hattie would continue to rip me apart. Then the Indian. Then, who knows? She pulled again on my lung. The organ slipped a little further out through that small gash in my side. A bloody lump exposed. The inside out. My body snapped forward. I vomited again. And all I could think about was train tracks. Blackened steel girders and wooden sleepers bisecting the desert and disappearing into horizon. Iron John Keene, the railroad worker with a sunburnt scalp, oil-smeared cheeks, and a daily spot at the saloon bar. So why John? John had an accident whilst laying track a decade ago. He'd been steaming drunk and, after a long day in the sun, collapsed onto a box of rail spikes. He woke up with a hangover and 6 inches of steel hanging from the side of his head. Now fully healed and nowhere near sober. Old John always enjoyed showing the boys his party trick, where he'd poke his entire tongue out the hole in his cheek. As I breathlessly fought with that bitch and watched her groan and gnash and tug at me, I wondered if I'd still be alive when that railroad tongue eventually flopped out of my chest. A noise, loud and hard and shaking the air around me. Hattie's face broke open and bloomed like a poisonous flower. Her skull shattered into sharp shards of white and oozed with charcoal sludge. Hattie's weight fell away. Her grip relinquished, and suddenly air filled my chest again. Another gunshot, then another. I was breathing, ragged and shallow, but breathing nonetheless. I tried to open my eyes. Light swarmed in flashing and blinding, a whirl of colors and shapes. I tried to get up and was firmly shoved to the floor, pain vibrating through my entire body. "Dutch," a voice said, "I don't think you should move yet." "Wyatt." I peered up at the silhouette looming over me, the dark face sickly spinning, yet slowly coming into view. And just before the light hit Wyatt's panicked eyes, I could have sworn I'd seen another man stood in his place. A dead man. A lost man. The crook. What the fuck happened? Ain't it obvious? I coughed. "Don't worry, Dutch. It's okay." Wyatt wasn't fooling anybody. His voice a couple of registers too high. "We'll get you to Mary. Or Needles. Or anyone who can stitch you back up." I felt pressure on the wound in my chest. I coughed again, the taste of sick in my mouth. "Not Mary," I said, my hand taking a fistful of Wyatt's shirt. "She'll tell half the town and we can't have anyone knowing what went down." "Okay, Needles," Wyatt said. His presence still felt otherworldly. "I'm sorry about this." A sharp pain in my side. I curled up into a ball. "Fuck." I screamed. I gasped and gasped for a breath that didn't come. My hand went searching for the blade he thrust into my side, and instead found a small, gulping hole. And then, suddenly I could breathe again. "What did you do?" "I don't know, Dutch." That squeaky, nervous voice from when our daddy would bring out the belt. Just kind of pushed it back in. "Pushed it back in?" "Yeah," he said. "I don't think your lungs are supposed to be on the outside." I sucked in another deep breath. It hurt like a motherfucker, but at least I had air in me again. I rolled onto my side, then tried to brave the blinding lights again. I opened my eyes. Dark lumps of flesh everywhere, wooden crates upturned and glistening with blood, the splintered hole of cool blue sky in the side of the barn, the warm afternoon sun lancing in, and motes of dust flashing gold on the air, and a body. The girl, not Hattie, the Indian, a bloodied bundle in the hay and dirt, legs and arms splayed out in all directions. Such a shameful shape. Her face was now loose and empty to the fear and pain from moments before. Smoke coiled up from a nasty hole above her left eye. Those eyes, how they stared for miles and miles and miles as if fixed on some unseen place beyond. "What do you do?" I coughed. "Save your dumbass." Wyatt grunted back. He was tearing off strips of his shirt and pressing them against my blood-slick skin. "Shot those ghouls that jumped you." I grabbed at Wyatt's collar and brought him my level, rage rising in me like a burning flame. There was only one. I spat into his gormless face. "But be you." I shook my head. "Another Indian kid." "Oh." Wyatt glanced over at the body. Then his face creased into a deep frown. "Yep," I said, nodding. Then, suddenly sapped of all energy, all hope, I collapsed into his shoulder. My rage drained away and left me cold. It was futile. Anger wouldn't change anything. We already had the blood of one Indian on our hands. What was two? Can you walk? Don't know, and I'm scared to try. Wyatt's jaw was tight. Nostrils flared. The face of that kid who was always too nervous to wade out beyond the reeds and the river, despite being a head and shoulders above all the other kids in town. Wyatt nodded, then disappeared for a while. He searched the barn for some wood and rope. Then he did his best to piece together a makeshift brace for my bad leg. It was awkward and hurt like a motherfucker, but with Wyatt's help, it got me to my horse. I kept my eyes trained on the horizon, whilst Wyatt bagged up the girls and prepared the barn to burn. No witnesses, no evidence, no crime. Only we'd know, and God, if he was still knocking around. The sun was loitering pretty close to the distant mountains when Wyatt finally emerged from the barn dragging 2 full Hessian sacks. You didn't need to peek inside to guess which one was Hattie's. All shapeless and wet. It reminded me of when Mama would return from the salt fork with a sopping bundle of laundry draped over her shoulder. Then, after slinging the girls over the back of each horse, Wyatt set that barn ablaze. We didn't wait long before setting off for the spot Wyatt had picked out for the boy and the cow. Just waited long enough to watch the shadows dance along the walls inside and smoke begin to plume out. We must have ridden out about a quarter mile when I reined in my horse and looked back at the flame. The sky was beginning to bruise, and the flame had completely swallowed the barn. Its amber tongues almost looked like they were licking at the pinkish underbellies of distant clouds. Almost content with the sight, I was about to ride on, but something caught my eye. Amidst the fiery blaze, I could see something dark moving within the open shell of the barn. "What's that?" I said, nodding toward the flame. Wyatt followed my gaze and cocked his head. "What do you see?" I squinted, tried to get a better look. A shape moving within the fire, as black as night. Smoke? Or maybe some wooden joists had started to fail. No, it looked like a man. A dark figure stepped out from the fire and then stopped. The flame still danced above the man's frame, but he appeared unperturbed, motionless, silent. Why wasn't he thrashing around in pain, rolling in the dirt and screaming? Do you think that's... Wyatt didn't even have to utter his name. We both knew. Of course it was that stubborn bastard. The start of all our problems. The reason Mangum was a godless patch of dirt. It was the crook. It was Walker. We should turn round and take him out, Wyatt said, sidling up next to me. I shook my head, my eyes fixed on the man on fire. No, we got bodies to bury. But Dutch, he's on foot. We can finally get that son of a bye. Enough! I shouted, my words ringing out over the empty land. We have 3 bodies we need to deal with, and only 3 working legs. How do you suppose we also bring that bastard home too? But Dutch... But nothing, I said, turning my horse around and my back on the fire. The dead's gonna be the last of your worries when some pissed off Indians come to town looking for their kids and find our crook's fingernails in one and your bullet in the other. Let's just do what we do and dig some deep fucking holes. Now take me to the dead boy. It wasn't far, and Wyatt had already made a hell of a start on the grave. The dirt looked good. Barely any rocks, which for Mangum is like striking oil. We dug in silence until the moon was the only light we had. Wyatt shouldered most of the burden, but despite my leg, I was pleased with the amount of earth I'd been able to shift. Perhaps all was not lost. For a while, we just stood there and stared out across the land. The distant mountains looked like the spine of a felled giant. Squint hard enough and you can see the double crosses, Wyatt said, finally breaking the silence. I nodded. You don't need to see them to know they're close. Yep. Wyatt lit a cigarette and started to smoke. He offered me a drag, but I declined. You okay? I shook my head. Then, after letting the question roll around in my skull for a while, I asked, have you ever heard them talk? Wyatt shot me a look, took a long drag, then spit into the dirt. No. Hattie did. I frowned at the distant cluster of wooden stakes that stippled the ground. Their shadows were long and hatched the sun-starched grass. Does it matter? Wyatt said, flicking his smoke into the dirt. I don't know. We rode back to town. Hattie's chewed-up corpse slumped over the back of Wyatt's horse. Our backs against those 2 unmarked graves. Not a word shared between. Silence, our only honesty, our only safety. For a while now, Wyatt and I had tricked ourselves into thinking we were doing the town a favor. Heck, there were days when I joke and half believe we were doing God's work. How foolish we were. In truth, there's nothing complicated or special about what we do. In the end, all we do is dig holes, throw people in them, then pray the ground accepts our offerings. Doing God's work. Christ, I knew it. Wyatt knew it. Everyone in Mangum had the thought rattling about in their head somewhere. How could we continue to have faith when the dirt just kept saying no? The morning light flashed crimson off the pressed tin. By the time we could see Mangum on the horizon, the town looked like it was on fire. Perhaps it soon would be. It was the only thing remarkable in the dead, yet hard-fought landscape. Everything else was just sky and dirt. The dirt that had grown tired of us and started rejecting the dead. But we pressed on towards Mangum, our home that we betrayed. Our hearts now heavy with the debts we owed. Our minds rattled by dreams of a ravaged world and a heaven closed to all creatures who scuttle beneath that silent sun. After seeing Walker burning against the twilight sky, I was certain that there was a hell, but it wasn't a place we go, but rather something we become. Story 3. I got a new job working security for a remote campus. They gave me a set of rules that keep me from something sinister. I took the night security job at Mount Green University's Spring Hill campus because I needed the money. Simple as that. The pay was decent. The hours worked with my class schedule, and how hard could it be watching over a few farm animals and a weather station? I should have known something was off when they spent more time on the rules than actual job training. Spring Hill campus isn't like the main university. It's about 20 miles outside town, just the veterinary program's practical facilities. A few buildings, some pastures, stables, and that weather station sitting alone in the middle of a field. Across the street sits Mount Green Corrections, a medium security prison that's been there since the 70s. The whole area feels isolated, especially at night. My supervisor, Jane, was a no-nonsense woman in her mid-40s who'd worked campus security for 6 years. On my first day, she handed me a laminated card and told me to memorize it. "These aren't suggestions," she said, watching me read. "Follow every single one, every single night. No exceptions." The rules were: night security protocols, Spring Hill campus. 1. Always keep your radio on channel 2. If you come across a life or death situation, switch to channel 4. 2. 3. The campus currently has 6 pigs, 3 horses, and 3 cows. Always do a head count during evening rounds. 4. 5. Always lock the gate to the weather station. 6. 7. There is no scarecrow in the weather station field. Go inside immediately if you see one. 8. 9. All animals are be inside by 9 p.m. If you hear any animals outside after this time, ignore them. 10. 11. Do not take the dirt road from the weather station to the stables any time after 11 p.m. Stick to the path with the lamps. 12. 15. If you hear a window break near the stables, immediately recount the animals. 14. 15. Do not use the bathroom next to the stables. You are not safe there. 16. 17. If you think that one of the animals escaped somehow, leave it. It's probably not one of ours. Rule 6 applies here as well. 18. 19. Our horses love alfalfa treats. Feel free to give them 1 per night. If they don't eat them, immediately lock yourself in the security office. 20. What's with Rule 4? I asked, why would there be a scarecrow? Jane's expression didn't change. There wouldn't be. That's the point. And Rule 8? What's wrong with the bathroom? Just follow the rules, Marcus. They exist for good reasons. I wanted to ask more questions, but something in her tone told me the conversation was over. My first night started quietly enough. I arrived at 10 p.m., did the evening walkthrough Jane had shown me, and settled into the small security office in the main building. The horses, Titus, Belle, and Daisy, were happy to see me and eagerly accepted their alfalfa treats. Good sign, according to Rule 10. At 11:30 p.m., I started my rounds. First stop, livestock count. 6 pigs snoring in their pen. 3 horses drowsing in their stalls. 3 cows chewing cud. All accounted for. Next was the weather station. It sat about 200 meters from the main buildings, surrounded by a chain-link fence in the middle of an open field. As I approached, my flashlight beam caught something that made my stomach drop. The gate was standing wide open. I stopped walking, suddenly very aware of how dark it was outside the small pool of light from my flashlight. Rule 3 was clear, always lock the gate. But it was already open, which meant either someone else had been here, or I swept my flashlight across the field beyond the weather station, and that's when I saw it. A dark shape stood motionless about 50 yards into the field. Tall, thin, arms outstretched. Even from a distance, I could tell it wasn't quite right. Too tall, too still, positioned at an odd angle. Rule for flashed through my mind. There is no scarecrow in the weather station field. Go inside immediately if you see one. My hand started shaking. I fumbled for my radio, but what would I say? Hey, There's a fake scarecrow in the field like you said there might be. That sounded insane even to me. The shape hadn't moved, but I wasn't taking any chances. I backed away from the weather station, keeping my flashlight trained on the figure. It looked almost human from this angle, like someone standing with their arms spread wide, but the proportions were wrong somehow. As I retreated, I realized I was heading toward the stables. The main building felt too far away, and I was starting to panic. Rule 8 said not to use the bathroom next to the stables, but surely hiding there for a few minutes was better than standing exposed in the open. I made it to the stable building and found the small bathroom attached to the outside wall. The door was tucked into a shadowy alcove, partially hidden from view. I slipped inside and locked the door behind me. Inside, I tried to steady my breathing. The room was cramped, with a small window that looked out toward the pasture. I pulled out my phone to call Jane, but there was no signal. Of course. That's when I heard the footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate, circling the building. Too heavy to be human, but with a strange, uneven gait. I crouched low beside the window and carefully peered out from the corner, staying in the shadows. What I saw made my blood freeze. A creature moved across the open ground near the stables, and it wasn't human. It stood upright like a person, but too tall, maybe 7 feet, with a lean, muscular frame covered in dark fur. Its head was elongated, wolf-like, but eerily uncanny, with ears that were too large and positioned far too low on its head. In the moonlight, I could see its eyes reflecting light as it turned its head, scanning the area. The thing moved with a strange, loping gait, sometimes dropping to all fours before rising again to its full height. It was clearly searching for something. For me, I realized with growing horror. It approached the window, and I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. From my position in the corner, I could see it, but remain hidden in the shadows. The creature's snout had pressed against the glass, threatening to shatter it. I could see sickly, large red and yellow eyes darting around, but finding nothing. Its mouth hung open, revealing rows of sharp teeth that caught the light. The thing tilted its head, studying the window with an intelligence that terrified me. It raised one clawed hand and tapped gently on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The creature's mouth moved, and I heard muffled sounds through the glass. It was trying to mimic human speech, though the words were distorted and wrong. Then sirens started wailing from across the street. The thing's head snapped toward the sound, and in an instant it was gone. I heard rapid footsteps, multiple sets, moving away from the building toward the road. Through the window, I could see searchlights sweeping the area around Mount Green Corrections. I didn't waste time wondering what was happening at the prison. I burst out of the bathroom and ran for the main building, not stopping until I was inside the security office with every door locked. I spent the rest of my shift in that office, jumping at every sound. When Jane arrived at 6 a.m. to relieve me, I was still clutching my flashlight. "Everything okay?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. The weather station gate was open. I managed to spit out, and there was something in the field. She went to the window and lit a cigarette. "Did you follow the rules?" "Mostly. I used the bathroom by the stables." Her face darkened. "Max, that rule exists for a reason. That bathroom has a window. Windows aren't safe after dark here. What the hell is going on? What are those things?" She was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "Get some rest. You'll be back tonight?" I don't know. The job pays well for a reason. Think about it. As I drove home, I kept checking my mirrors. I needed the money. Student loans weren't going to pay themselves. But did I need it badly enough to go back? By 9 p.m., I was putting on my uniform again. I told myself it was just the money. But deep down, I knew I had to understand what I'd seen. What were those things? How long had they been there? And why did Jane seem unfazed by everything I told her? Tonight, I'd be more careful. I'd follow every rule exactly. What could go wrong? Story 4. Sometimes the road signs lie. A few weeks ago, My wife and I went on a road trip for a family reunion in El Paso, Texas. I am now sitting in the hospital waiting room, desperately wishing we hadn't. How much longer? Melanie asked, leaning her seat back and putting her hand into the small of her back in a feeble attempt to find a more comfortable position. Google says we got a few more hours to go, I said, glancing quickly at my phone sitting in the cup holder, then putting my eyes back to the road. Do we need to stop again? Melanie shifted in her seat a bit, removed her hand from behind her, then sat it back up to its original vertical position. At 7 months pregnant, her options for comfort were quickly dwindling, and none of them involved the front seat of a car. No, let's just go. If we stop again, I'm not going to want to get back into the car. Signal loss, my phone's robotic female voice announced. God damn it, I sighed. The phone had been doing that for the past couple of hours at increasing intervals. There had apparently been an accident or something on the main highway, which would have backed us up by at least an hour, according to the all-knowing Google. In order to avoid that, we'd taken a detour that snaked around the accident through the desert on a two-lane highway that had been 3 hours ago, maybe more. It was hard to keep track of when it had happened because even before the phone had alerted us of the accident, the whole trip had been little more than a pallet of browns and grays broken up only by the regular bathroom break. As I saw it, the New Mexico desert was a skid mark on the underpants of America, and if I never had the pleasure of driving through it again, it would be too soon. The sun had set about an hour ago, not long before the signal started getting more spotty, and the highway hypnosis had really started to get to me. There was nothing but desert on either side of us, and even with the high beams on the darkness covered us like a thick blanket. Got any more Red Bull? I asked if we're going to go for a few more hours. I need some wings. Melanie reached into the back seat for a second, grunting with discomfort, then returned with a can of Red Bull. Last one, she said. This was sitting on the seat, so the sun warmed it up for you. Great, I said, taking the can, cracking the seal, and swallowing 3 large gulps. This will sit well with all the other junk I've been eating for the past 2 days. Without a baby on the way, Mel and I could have driven the stretch between Bozeman and El Paso in 2 days without a problem. But with her being as pregnant as she was, we had to carve out almost double the time, and she was still miserable. I let out a burp that tasted like all the atrocious snacks and truck stop food from that day mixed with the warm energy drink I was layering on top, and solemnly promised myself I would eat nothing but salad and water for the rest of my life. Turn left here for the Church of Christ. I thought the Church of Christ was back there, Mel said, reading the dilapidated sign as we passed it. No, that was the Church of Jesus Christ. I said, big difference, apparently. All through the drive, we'd seen a wide variety of local churches, mostly generic, but after passing one called it the Church of Liberty, over a backdrop of a poorly drawn Confederate flag, we had turned it into a sort of game to see who could find the most outlandish one. We sat in silence for a while, listening to hum of the engine and the intermittent signal loss notification from my phone. I had looked at the phone earlier when the signal was stronger and saw that we just needed to go to the end of this road, turn right, and we'd find ourselves getting back onto the freeway. So although the intermittent announcement from the cup holder was annoying, I wasn't particularly concerned. That was until we saw a sign that said, freeway entrance, left 1 mile. I thought you said it was right at the end of the road, Melanie said, sitting up and grabbing the phone. That's what it said. I insisted. I checked it last time we had service like half an hour ago. We had about 60 or so miles to go, and then it was a right. How sure are you? She asked, putting the phone back into the cup holder. 'Cause your phone is still saying it has no service, so it's not going to be any help. Pretty damn, I said. Just then we passed another sign, freeway entrance, left 0.5 mile. At least, I think so. I think we should follow the signs, Mel said. I don't want to get lost out here, and the phone hasn't had consistent service in a while. It could have reset and changed routes or something to have us avoid the highway. Remember last time? I did remember last time. A Vegas trip that ended up being 4 hours longer than it should have been because my phone reset and had us taking frontage roads and city streets. It would have been longer had Mel not thought to check the route on her phone. I was sure that I had seen it was taking us back to the highway, and that the next turn was a right in about 30 minutes or so given our current speed. But with the evidence to the contrary quickly approaching me in the darkness, illuminated by my headlights, I made the single most critical mistake that I would regret for the rest of my life. I followed the street sign and turned left. Mel leaned back in her seat, embarking again on her quest for a comfortable position, and I continued to stare at the lines in the road as we passed. Time begins to lose meaning when you've been on the road in the dark for as long as we were that night. It could have been hours that we spent speeding straight down the desert road, or it could have been days, with no focal point. It was really up to the clock alone to tell us how long we'd been there, and the clock on the dashboard had inexplicably reset at some point. Something it did on occasion for most of the time I'd owned the car. Another bullet for Melanie to fire at me whenever we got into our marital spats. I didn't care, and she really didn't either. But it was another straw to load up on the camel's back nonetheless. My faith in the phone had begun to waver even further, as I was becoming sure even that clock was running slow somehow. We'd go for 5 or 6 miles according to the odometer, and the clock would read only a minute or two had passed. I drained the last bit of Red Bull down my throat, again promising myself nothing but clean eating after this trip was over. Moments later, I felt a dull pressure in my bowels. The last drop of liquid must have been the last straw for my bladder. Mel slept quietly next to me, having finally crashed a while back, and I made the second decision I would come to regret, although we hadn't seen another car for miles. I flipped my hazard lights on and pulled over to the side of the road. I turned off the car and stepped out of the car and relieved myself, relishing one of the finer points of being a man and having the ability to take a leak in the middle of the road without much fanfare and return to the car. Mel stirred then and asked if we were there yet. Not yet, just a bit further, had to take a leak. She rolled her eyes and closed them again. I turned the key to start the car back up and heard a sound that sunk my heart into my stomach. Click, 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 click. Ah shit, I said under my breath. Please don't do this. I turned the key again and once more heard the series of clicks telling me that my car didn't have enough power to start back up. Fuck! I sighed, resting my head against the steering wheel in defeat. What's wrong? Mel asked, opening one eye. Battery's dead. What? There was a hint of panic in her voice, and she sat back up, totally awake now. But the car was just running. Yeah, it was running off of the alternator. The battery needs just enough power to start. Then the car can run off the power generated by the alternator. All we need is a jump, and we should be able to get the rest of the way, as long as we don't turn the car off. But who's going to jump us? Mel asked, when was the last time you saw a car? It's been a while. I admitted, definitely not since we made that turn back there. Fuck, Mel spat. Fuck, fuck, fuck. Stay here, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. Where are you going? She asked, the panic in her voice rising. Just up there, I said, pointing down the road. I think I see a sign, maybe 100 yards out there. It might give us an idea of which direction we need to go, or if we need to just wait until the sun comes up. I could tell she didn't like it, but she didn't say anything. I'll keep my flashlight on so you can see where I am. I'll just go there, then straight back. She nodded. Unless I see a Denny's, then you're on your own. She flipped me off. I kissed her cheek and stepped out into the night. The air was brisk, despite having been downright hot during the day, and I remembered learning in science class as a kid that desert wildlife had to be tough enough to endure not only the heat during the day, but the cold, sometimes freezing temperatures at night as well. I shivered and hugged my arms around my torso, and made my way down the road to where I thought I'd seen a road sign. As I approached, I realized it wasn't the kind of sign I was hoping for. It was made of crack, but that looked just a little better than the sign for the church we'd seen a while back, and on it painted in white letters it read, Gomper's Farm, above a crudely drawn arrow pointing down a dirt path to the right. My gaze followed the arrow, and I thought I could see a light far off in the distance. A scream broke through the darkness that turned my blood to ice. Mel, I called, wheeling around and bolting back the way I came. Melanie. I could see the shape of the car in the distance, but it was too far away for my flashlight to do much good. I sprinted down the road, screaming my wife's name in a hot panic. What? Melanie called back, alarmed. I slowed when I heard her voice and held the light up again. She was standing on the passenger side of the car, with the door open. I thought I heard you screaming, I said through heaving breaths. She looked around, confused. No, you didn't hear that? I asked. She shook her head. No, I don't think so. I was in the car until I heard you yelling, though. Where did it come from? I don't know, I said, shaking my head and spitting the bitter flavor of adrenaline into the dirt. Maybe it was an animal or something, she suggested. What do the signs say? There's a farmhouse or something about a mile down the road, I think. I explained. It's not exactly ideal, but if I jog it, I can make it in about 10 minutes or so. If anyone's there, all they'd have to do is give me a ride back and help us jump the car. If nobody's there, we'll probably have to wait till morning unless a car happens to pass by. She mulled it over for a moment. Then I saw the resolve on her face, and I knew what was coming next. I'm going with you then. I didn't like it, but I could tell that arguing wasn't going to get me anywhere but the doghouse. And considering the scream I heard, or thought I heard anyway, I preferred having her close. Fine, I agreed. Grab your jacket, though. I'm going to grab mine, and a couple of water bottles from the back. A moment later, we were hiking down the road, our silhouettes illuminated intermittently by the orange hazard lights we'd elected to leave on. I doubted the battery would last if those lights were on too long, but if someone was driving past, I would hate for them to miss it. Mel had thought to leave a note on the windshield telling whomever found it that we'd gone to the farmhouse and would be back shortly. If anyone was kind enough to stop, they'd hopefully see the letter and stick around long enough to help, that where they'd know where to look for us coming back, so they could take whatever they wanted out of the car before we returned. There was a cool breeze that played with our hair as we walked. Not uncomfortable, but enough to make me zip my jacked up just a bit more. Mel held the only flashlight we had, and the beam bounced up and down in the darkness like a buoy. The car was barely visible when Mel shrieked, so suddenly I nearly tripped on my own foot. What? What? I asked, suddenly panicked. Look, she said, extending her finger past the head of the flashlight. What? It's gone now. You didn't see it? No, I was too busy asking myself why I'm hiking with a pregnant banshee. There's something out there, she said, ignoring my jab. Just past that rock. I saw a pair of golden eyes. Probably a coyote, I said, starting to walk again. They're cowards. If we keep walking and talking, nothing should bug us, especially if we stick to the road here. Mel nodded, then caught up to me. How much longer do you think it'll be till we get to the farm? Dunno, I shrugged. 10 or 15 minutes maybe. Just then I saw the eyes she was talking about. Out in the distance, next to a large boulder on the side of the road, sat a pair of curious golden eyes. Definitely a coyote, I said, pointing at it. You can see its shape a bit, all fours low to ground. It looks like it might be a little bit bigger than the ones I've seen, but there's not much else out here that looks like that. That's probably what I heard earlier too. One of these guys catching a rabbit or something. I wasn't sure I believed it, but it felt good to get some sort of explanation on the record. We kept talking as we walked down the path, closer to the eyes, and when they disappeared I was a bit disappointed but not surprised. Part of me wanted to see the coyote up close. But if we got close enough to see it, that probably meant we were close to a den, which is the last place we want to find ourselves. We talked about what we'd do when we finally got home and how soon we'd find ourselves laughing about the whole ordeal when Mel stopped suddenly in the middle of the road. Shit, what is it now? I asked, looking around another pair of eyes. I have to pee. No chance you can hold it? I asked, holding back a chuckle at the poor timing. Not unless you can talk this kid out of using my bladder as a waterbed, she replied, handing me the flashlight. Where should I go? Why not right here? Are you kidding? Not even a little bit, I said. You probably shouldn't wander too far off the trail, and it's not like anyone's around to see you anyway. Hell, if someone showed up and the universe decided now was the time to embarrass you, I'd still take that over the rest of the walk. Fine, she sighed, pulling her maternity pants down and squatting. As she did her business, I took the opportunity to scan the surroundings with the flashlight. I found a few more pairs of golden eyes on either side of the road, which quickened my pulse just a little. I didn't like being outnumbered, and I liked being surrounded even less. Melanie finished her business, and with some assistance from me to get back up to a vertical position, we were off again, our feet crunching against the dirt as we walked. I thought I heard something then, and this time it was my turn to stop. "What?" Mel asked. "Sure," I said. I started again, then stopped. "What is it?" Mel whispered. "Another scream?" "Nothing." I lied, picking the pace back up. Thought I heard a car. We walked again in silence, Mel forgetting to keep the conversation going to keep the coyotes back, and me listening too intently to think about topics to discuss. I knew I'd heard something behind us. I hadn't noticed it at first, or maybe it hadn't been there at first, but after we stopped I could make out the faint sound of footsteps on dirt that stopped almost as soon as we did and picked up, or so I thought, as soon as we had. I'd also heard a strange lapping sound just after we started walking again, like something licking the urine off the dirt road. When the farmhouse came into view, the relief between us was palpable. We had both been too preoccupied with the growing number of eyes on either side of the road that we hadn't noticed that the light I'd seen from the road had shut off. It was a small house, but I hadn't expected much more than what was given the location. If it had 4 walls and a roof, I would have been happy. But from the outside, I would have guessed that it had at least a few bedrooms, and behind it stood a structure that looked like it may be a detached garage or a large shed of some sort. We approached the house, and I was just about to walk up the wooden porch steps when Melanie grabbed my hand. "Hold on." I turned to look at her. Her eyes were wide, and the pupils were so dilated from the darkness they were nearly black. "What's wrong? Do you think this is a good idea?" I rolled my eyes. "If it wasn't, you could have said something 20 minutes ago." I mean, she paused for a second. "Do you think these people will help us? We're strangers in the middle of nowhere, and it's the middle of the night." I shrugged. "I think the worst that can happen is they tell us to leave. They'll probably answer the door with a shotgun in hand, but who wouldn't?" Melanie nodded, and I saw her throat work up and down in a dry, nervous swallow. I walked up the few steps, the wood creaking beneath my feet, leaving Melanie at the bottom. I held up my fist and rapped 3 times on the storm door. We waited, listening intently for sounds inside the house, but heard nothing. Instead, I heard what sounded like the soft, padded feet of a coyote in the dirt behind us, but I brushed that away. They were known for being incredibly quiet. That thought didn't make me feel much better. I opened the storm door and knocked again, this time on the wooden door. The sound carried far better, but again we heard nothing but silence. "I think we should go," Melanie said. "Something isn't right." The knot in my stomach agreed, and I turned to leave just as the door opened. "Who's there?" a man's voice said. He hadn't turned the light on in the house, so when I turned back around, all I could see was a silhouette in the dark, illuminated only by the ambient glow of Melanie's flashlight that was pointed directly at my back. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," I said. "My name is Matthew Howell, and this is my wife, Melanie. Our car died down the road, and we were hoping you could give us a jump." "No," the man said under his breath. No. "Sorry," I said, thinking I misheard him. "Sorry, no. We cannot jump your car tonight. It'll have to wait until morning. Sir, I'm sorry to impose, but we really can't dash." A twig snapped behind me. Very quiet, but clear nonetheless. "Please come inside," the man said. "You'll stay here tonight." I turned to look at Melanie, who was already walking up the steps. The man opened the door wider to let us in and clicked on a light in the hallway, bathing us in a glow that immediately made me feel better. The farmhouse looked on the inside just as I would have guessed. It was modestly furnished with what looked like handcrafted furniture. Paintings of flowers and landscapes adorned striped wallpaper-covered walls that looked like they were most recently renovated in the 70s, and faded area rugs covered with floors that creaked beneath our feet even with the slightest weight. The man who stood before me now looked just like the kind of person who would live in a house like this. He had thin white hair and a large beard with yellow tobacco stains around his mouth, and he wore a set of beige long johns under a pair of pants held up with suspenders, the outfit of a man who had been disturbed in his bed. I guess he was somewhere in his 60s, still reasonably muscular from working on the farm, but well past his prime and settling into the atrophy of old age. He had been holding a shotgun in one hand, and just then put it down and leaned it up against the door frame. The man turned and called to someone inside the house. "Ma, put a kettle on, would you? We've got 2 here for Night." "Really?" I said. "I don't think we can dash." "I insist," the man said, turning back to me. "The roads aren't safe at night. It's too easy to get turned around." "Yeah, I can see that," I admitted. I thought we were doing well until we saw that sign for the highway back there. The man looked at me, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something in his eyes, but before I could make out what it was gone. The sign was all he said, and gave an understanding nod. "Do you have a restroom I could use?" Melanie asked, cutting in. "Yes." Down the hall and dash. The man stopped when he saw her, and again there was something in his expression I didn't like. But again I couldn't make it out before it was gone. "To the right," he finished. Melanie thanked him and made her way to the bathroom. "We'll be just around the corner in the kitchen," the man told her. He turned and led me around the corner, where I now heard someone else bustling about, presumably putting a kettle on. "My name is Arthur," the man said, sitting down at the kitchen table. "This here is Ruthie," he said, gesturing to a small woman in a white nightgown who was just then lighting the gas stove. Ruthie turned around and offered me a smile. "Hello," she said. "Did I hear your name is Matthew?" I nodded. "Yes, and my wife's name is Melanie." "They're in the family way," Arthur told Ruthie. "Oh, dear," Ruthie said pleasantly. "How exciting. How far along is she?" "Not the word I'd use," Arthur said under his breath. 7 months. I told her. 7 months, she exclaimed, beaming. "And where is she now?" "She's in the restroom," I said. "Oh, I've got some things for her. Let me run and get them," Ruthie said pleasantly, then disappeared around the corner. Arthur and I sat in silence for a moment. Then I said, "Are you sure you can't just give us a jump? Or, do you have a phone I could use?" He shook his head. "Sorry, but no. Ruthie and I don't go out after dark, and we haven't had use for a phone in 20 years or more. We'll be happy to give you a ride back to your car and get you on your way as soon as the sun's up." "What if we dash?" "Listen," Arthur said seriously, leaning forward. He again wore the expression I'd seen earlier. It was one I didn't understand, but looking back at it now, I think my father, who had served in Desert Storm and had seen the expression worn by men as they stood on the other side of a loaded gun, but were determined to show courage in the face of fear, would have picked it up in an instant. "You were with your lady the whole time, right?" "Ever since the car broke down, yeah," I said. "And even before that, we've been elbow to elbow for just about every second for the past 2 days." "All right, good." He leaned back in his chair. "That's good. What's this about?" I asked. And perhaps he would have told me then, although looking back I doubted that he could have, not then. But the tea kettle began to whistle, and Ruthie returned quickly to shut it off and pour the contents into 4 mugs. Melanie came around the other corner and took a seat next to me. Ruthie asked us if we took cream or sugar in our tea, which neither of us did. Then she brought mugs over with chamomile tea bags steeping in each of them and took a seat next to Arthur. "We have a guest bedroom at the end of the hall. You can use until the morning," Ruthie said. "I'm glad you found your way here safely." "Yeah," Melanie said, bobbing her tea bag up and down in the water by the string it was attached to. "Those coyotes were really giving me the creeps." "Coyotes?" Ruthie asked. "Yeah, Ma, coyotes," Arthur said in a tone that sounded like they'd had the conversation 1,000 times. "I gotta chase them away from the chickens at least a few times a week. You know that." She nodded. "Yes. I just meant I hadn't seen any tonight was all. Probably because they were all with us," I said. There were about a dozen sets of eyes following us up the road. "A dozen, you say?" Ruthie asked, surprised. "Yeah, that'd make sense," Arthur said. "They didn't try to get at you, though, did they?" "No," Melanie said, taking a small exploratory sip of her tea, then another larger one, satisfied that it wasn't too hot. "They stayed off the road. I think one of them was behind us, though, so I don't think they all stayed off the road," I said. Melanie looked at me reproachfully. "And when did you plan on telling me?" "As soon as we didn't have one behind us anymore," I told her, shrugging. "They didn't get too close, though?" Arthur asked. "No, they kept their distance," I told him. I'm pretty sure the closest one was the one behind us, and that was still a ways back, I think. He nodded and sipped his own mug. That's good. Those coyotes are serious business. Do you get many of them out here? Melanie asked. Arthur ran a hand through his thin silver hair. You could say that, I suppose. More than most, but less than some. I think they like the chickens we keep in the back. Not much else to eat around here that isn't burrowed away somewhere. So it's an easy meal if they can get at them before I hear the commotion and fire off a round or two. Melanie shivered. I'm glad I don't have to worry about that sort of thing. Where are you folks from? Arthur asked, sipping at his own mug now. Montana, I said. We have coyotes up our way too, but they mostly stay in the more rural parts, and we don't have chickens or anything to worry about. I found one rooting around in the garbage, though, when I was a kid. I told everyone I thought I saw a wolf. The boy who cried wolf, Melanie teased, jabbing my side with her elbow. That's Matt, all right. I rolled my eyes and fiddled with my own tea bag. I was a one for tea, especially chamomile, because it reminded me of being sick as a kid. My mother swore by her herbal remedies, especially those that came in the form of tea. Are we really staying the night? Melanie asked, turning to me. I looked at Arthur, who gave me a clear, solemn nod. I said, yeah, I guess we are. It's late and Arthur and Ruthie say they have a guest room we can stay in for the night. Are you sure? Melanie asked, turning to Ruthie. It won't be too much trouble? Ruthie waved the idea off like a fly. None at all. We haven't had visitors in 10 years or better. Not since the Pruitts came for Christmas. And aside from my boys, you're the first to come to our door in just about as long. Oh, you have children? Melanie asked. Long grown now, Arthur said, nodding and staring into his mug. Twins. Ruthie said, beaming. They're about your age, I guess. I've got most of their old clothes and things in the back room, if you'd like to take a look before you go to bed. I pulled the chest out of the closet already. Melanie looked at me, and I gave her a shrug. Then she returned Ruthie's smile, and together they made their way further into the house. You two are lucky, Arthur said when the women had left. How do you figure? I asked. When the coyotes are hungry, they'll try to get at just about anything that moves. If you really had as many watching you as you say, you could have been walking to your own graves. I wasn't sure I believed him, but the shiver that crawled down my spine certainly did. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant voices of our wives talking about children and the tick of an old grandfather clock somewhere in the house when I heard the scream again. It was coming from outside, somewhere close to the house, but it was hard to tell. I sat up in my chair, but Arthur didn't move. Birds, he said flatly. Sorry. I asked. We got birds out here that sound like that sometimes, he said. Sound like a lady shrieking, or sometimes a child crying, but it's just the birds calling to each other. Birds? He nodded. What kind of birds sound like that? He shrugged. I don't know. I heard them called lyre birds once. Not sure if that was a name or just a fitting description of things. Yeah, I said, feeling the name scratch away something on the surface of my brain, a fact buried under the dust and cobwebs of my mind. I've heard of those, I think. They can copy other noises like parrots can, right? I thought they lived in Australia or something. Arthur shrugged again. Couldn't say. I don't even know if that's what they are for certain, but I know that the sound we just heard was one of them birds. I settled back in my seat, feeling better about the scream I'd heard earlier. It would have made sense if it came from the air. That could explain why I wasn't sure where it had come from. That reminds me of something that happened to me as a kid. Nothing like crying wolf, but it was an important lesson, I think. Arthur said, his words careful somehow. I took a sip of the tea between my palms, not because I wanted it, but because it felt impolite to leave the whole mug full. You ever heard of a Arthur searched for the word? A brood parasite? I think that's what they call it. I shook my head. It's a kind of bird that leaves its eggs in another bird's nest. Sometimes it'll push the other eggs out, but usually it just leaves their egg there for the other bird to care for. I heard about these when I was a little boy, maybe 8 or so, and I found a robin's nest with a bunch of little blue eggs and one single black and white speckled one. I thought I'd found something really special, So every day that spring I would climb that tree to see if it hatched. A couple weeks went by and eventually the egg hatched. It was the first one, and I was so excited to see the little black chick inside. Not long after the others hatched, and each of them was a little robin that looked nothing like this black bird, which was now twice the size of these other ones. The days went by, and one day, as I was about to climb the tree, I found one of the baby robins laying in the grass. I picked it up and climbed back up the tree to find that of the 4 robins that had started in the tree, there was only one left, and of course my big black bird that was now far larger than the others. It had started to knock the other birds out of the nest. I put the chick that I had saved in the grass back into the nest. And do you know what that black bird did? I shook my head. It killed it right before my eyes, tore it apart like it was nothing. I ran to tell my father, and that's when I learned about birds that impose their eggs in others' nests so that the other birds will raise them. I thought that dash. A voice outside interrupted us. It was a cry that almost sounded like it had words this time, but the words were indistinguishable despite the fact that it sounded like it was coming from right outside the window. Arthur sat bolt upright and turned his head quickly to the window. He stood from his seat and crossed the room with 3 large steps. I was just telling a story. Leave us be. I couldn't be certain, but I thought I heard something scurry away in the dirt. What was that? I asked, try not to sound as nervous as I now felt. Them damn coyotes, Arthur said. I thought you said the cries were the birds. I said, them too, Arthur said, his tone coming off more annoyed than anything, although there was something else as well. The coyotes get curious and the birds get agitated, and before I know it, this house is the busiest place in all of New Mexico. He walked around the house, and I heard the door knob shake. Was he checking the lock? Then he returned. I think it's best if we call it night. Ruthie will be up early to make y'all breakfast, but feel free to sleep in as late as you'd like. In the morning we'll take the truck down to the road, and I'll jump it for you, and you'll be on your way. I took another gulp of tea, try and get the mug down at least halfway, and agreed. Story 5. It's knocking on my window again. Should I let it in? I started hearing the knocks on the 3rd week, after becoming comfortable enough in the office to take space in the break room, following a lunchtime spent chatting with my new co-workers. I sat at the table finishing off my cup of coffee. I heard a few taps on one of the windows behind me, although I found nothing when I turned to look. I wrote it off as nothing, finished my coffee, and got back to work. The next time I heard it, I found nothing again. It sounded like a piece of wood lightly tapping on some glass, so it was easy to write it off as some kink in construction of the building. Although I want to ask around the office about the sound, I didn't want to come off as strange to my new co-workers, especially since I had landed a job in the field I wished to pursue. 3 months later, I returned from a holiday. The first Monday back is always hard, especially when you have a hangover. I sat at my desk with my head in my arms. Bobby walked in 3 minutes late as usual and sat in his seat beside me. Still feeling like shit? He asked. Still feeling. From last Friday. I shook my head, confused. Oh, come on, he said. Peppermint? You went wild. A little too wild for a work thing. I don't know. He furrowed his brow. That bad. I wasn't even in last week. Bobby laughed. Don't fuck with me. I'm not fucking with you. Okay, you weren't in. Jeez. The next day, I sat in the break room nursing my persisting headache. The knocks returned. The consistency of them resounded through my mind. I did my best to ignore them still. A difficult task considering my state. I returned home that night to my girlfriend, having disappeared with all her belongings, leaving only a note on the table to explain her decision to break up and move out. I tried to sleep in our bed, but the memory of her burned too bright, her scent in the pillows too strong. I resorted to buying some liquor from the store down the road and let myself into the office. At least only vague memories of banality lingered in the air. The meeting room felt cold. The drinks sorted that out in no time. I sat there for a while, tried to cry out a little, yet nothing came. Then the knocking started. 3 consecutive knocks. I ignored it again. However, the knocks started getting louder and heavier, taking on the quality of a human fist rapping on the window. I turned to look and found nothing. I ignored it. It continued. Louder, heavier. I stood. The window overlooking the city appeared empty. Nothing behind it nor in front of it. Although my sight was impaired by the light inside reflecting the room back to me, leaving little to look through, I approached with caution. As I stood a few feet away from the glass, I could see the glimmer of something off to the side. My eyes struggled to focus for a moment before they adjusted to patches of reflected light. I saw it move to stand in front of me on the other side. A face, my face, reflecting back a wide, unsettling grin. Somehow the figure comfortably stood on the outside of the third story. Somehow it had my visage. I turned, grabbed my keys, and made for the exit. I was out of there within a minute. I followed a couple of drunks into the city center, happy to be around people. I looked around, behind me, in front of me, above me, uncertain of when this figure might strike. After a while, I managed to make it back to the apartment, locking the door behind me and watching the door from my sofa. It didn't take long for the adrenaline to wear off and for me to crash. I awoke the next morning. No one had entered the apartment. I got dressed and called an Uber to get me to work. Wandering the streets seemed an unwise decision. As soon as I entered the office, a manager pulled me into a meeting room and demanded to know what I'd been up to the previous night. I told him that I came to the office to calm down after a personal problem and then left. He pointed to the bottle I left behind and told me it was unprofessional at best. However, a worse crime had been committed. A few monitors had been stolen. I confessed to the drinking, but pleaded innocence on the final charge. He relented, told me he knew how the security cameras had captured me fleeing the office empty-handed. They wanted to know if I saw anything strange. I denied everything. It took a while to go over all the details until I was fully exonerated. They had nothing that could link me to the theft. Aside from the thing outside the window, I knew nothing. Although I doubt the creature had such simple designs. That night, when I returned to my apartment, I found a large box sitting outside my door. I took it in. Inside the box were 3 old dusty monitors. I packed them back up into the box and taped it up. With great heft, I managed to take the box across town on foot and threw it into the docks. The box sank into the water. I sat on a bench, sweating hard, catching my breath. Relief washed over me. I told myself that suspicion had been averted from me. I told myself that any evidence linking me to the crime had sunk to the bottom of the sea. And yet, my anxiety still peaked. I remembered the creature that I had seen, that it knew where I lived, and that it could be hiding in any of the shadows surrounding me. Disturbed by that thought, I ran to the center of town again and found reprieve among my fellow man. I spent the next few weeks in my apartment. Work never called to ask where I had been. Bobby kept tagging me on Instagram. I checked one of the posts and found myself standing next to a group of other colleagues at a bar. A photo I never remembered appearing in. I got messages from people I know talking about the great nights I didn't have, or thanking me for birthday gifts I never gave. A couple of days ago, the knocking started. Sometimes at my window, other times at my door. 3 knocks, getting louder and louder, heavier and heavier with each rap. I think it wants to come in. Should I let it? Story 6. Don't look through the peephole after midnight. I moved into this apartment complex 6 months ago. It's one of those brittlest concrete towers, built in the late 60s, full of asbestos and character. My unit is on the 9th floor, end of the hall. It's quiet, cheap, and the view's decent if you lean far enough of a balcony. There's only one thing I don't like. The hallway. It's always been too long. Too narrow, lit by flickering fluorescents that hum just loud enough to make you feel like you're being watched. The other tenants on my floor are older, mostly retirees. I rarely see anyone coming or going. The whole place feels forgotten, like it's a step behind time. Still, it's home. Or it was until Halloween night. I hadn't planned on handing out candy. It's an apartment building. I didn't think kids went door to door here. Most years I just turn off the lights and watch horror movies with wine and a blanket. It's become a tradition. That night was no different. I was curled up on the couch watching Thing when I heard the knock. It was soft, deliberate, just once. 6:34 p.m. I pause the movie and stare at the door. Another knock. Same volume, same rhythm. I got up and checked the peephole. A little girl stood outside. 6, maybe 7. Dressed like a ballerina. Pink tutu, sparkles, white tights. Her costume looked old. Not vintage, just worn out. The tulle was stained like it had been dragged through a parking lot. She didn't have a candy bag. Didn't say trick or treat. Just stood there with her arms at her sides, looking straight ahead, not directly at the peephole, but close enough that it was unnerving. I didn't open the door. "Sorry, sweetie, I don't have any candy," I said gently. She didn't move. I waited, watched. A full minute passed before she turned and walked slowly down the hallway toward the elevator, which, oddly, never dinged when it opened. 6:50 p.m. Another knock. I checked the peephole again. A boy this time, maybe 10 years old, wearing a cheap astronaut costume. The cardboard chest piece had flaked silver duct tape hanging off the edges, and his helmet, a scratched-up bike helmet with a plastic visor, was fogged from the inside, just like the girl. He didn't say anything. No candy bag. Just stood there. I watched for over a minute. Nothing changed. Then he turned and left. Same slow, dragging walk toward the elevator. Again, no ding. I started feeling watched. I checked the hallway cam through the tenant app on my phone. It showed a live feed of the 9th floor hallway, but the screen was blank. Not off, just black. Like the hallway wasn't there anymore. By 7:15 p.m., I'd had 3 more visitors. All children, all silent, all dressed in decaying versions of classic costumes. A firefighter with a melted helmet, a nurse with a rust-colored stain down the front, a cowboy missing one boot. Each time I looked through the peephole, each time I felt colder. It wasn't just weirdness. It was the way they stood. Perfectly still. No fidgeting. No shifting their weight. Kids can't stay still that long. These ones weren't right. I messaged my friend Tasha on the 3rd floor. Me. "Are there kids trick-or-treating in the building tonight?" Tasha. "Not that I've seen." "Why?" I told her about the kids. She sent back a skull emoji and said, "Creepy AF." Then nothing. At 8:03 p.m., the ballerina came back. Same girl, same spot. Only this time, she was facing the peephole. Her eyes didn't blink. Her head twitched slightly every few seconds, like someone had dropped a needle on a broken record. Her mouth was open just a little too wide, and her teeth, God, her teeth were small, gray, and far too many. I backed away from the door. Not 10 seconds later, another knock. Softer this time. Almost curious. I didn't move. The knock came again. Then a third time. Gentle, rhythmic, as if she were knocking to a beat only she could hear. I stayed in the kitchen until 9 p.m. That's when the adult knocked. 3 firm knocks. Sharp. Final. I checked the peephole. No one. But the hallway had changed. Gone was the dim fluorescent light. Instead, there was a flickering orange glow, like from a dying fire. The carpet was gone, replaced by bare concrete, cracked and wet. The walls were streaked with mold and something darker. Then I saw them, all the children I'd seen before. The ballerina, the astronaut, the nurse, the cowboy, lined up along the hallway, shoulder to shoulder, and behind them stood something else. A figure, tall, inhumanly thin, wearing a mask made of shattered glass. The mask reflected back my own face, but distorted, broken, rearranged like a puzzle with pieces missing. Its limbs were too long, its hands too sharp, and in the warped reflection, I could see something crawling beneath my skin. I blinked, and in that moment, it was right at my door. I screamed and stumbled back, engaging every lock I had. Deadbolt, chain, floor bar. Then I turned off all the lights and sat on the kitchen floor, clutching a knife like it meant something. No more knocks came. 12:03 a.m. The power went out. My phone lit up with one last notification from the tenant app. New hallway footage available, 9th floor, 11:59 p.m. Watch, I clicked it. The camera flickered on. The hallway was normal, at first. Then the lights dimmed, and one by one, the children appeared on screen. Silent, motionless, lined up across the hallway, staring at my door. Then the glass mask figure emerged behind them. Its limbs twitched as it walked. It moved like a broken spider, limbs jerking half a second too late, like something was controlling it from a distance. Then the ballerina stepped forward, placed one hand on my door. She leaned in close, face nearly touching the camera, and whispered something. No audio, no subtitles. But I swear I heard in my head, "You looked." We answered. Then the feed cut to black. I left that night. I didn't pack. I didn't wait for sunrise. I ran down 9 flights of stairs and drove until my hands stopped shaking. I'm in a motel 3 cities over now. But last night, around midnight, I heard a knock. Soft, deliberate. I'm on the ground floor. There's no hallway outside my room, just a window. I looked through the peephole anyway. The carpet was gone. Story 7. The landlord gave me one rule when I moved in. I broke it when I moved into this building. I thought I'd finally caught a break. Rent in this city is brutal. Between my dead-end job and my divorce bleeding me dry, I've been one bad month away from sleeping in my car. So when I saw the listing for a 1-bedroom at less than half the going rate, I didn't even think. I called, signed, and moved in within the week. The place was rough. The hallway smelled like mildew and cigarettes that had been smoked 30 years ago, but never left. The wallpaper peeled in strips like dead skin. The elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked permanent, but it was mine. The landlord, Mr. Kerr, was a wiry man with eyes too big for his face, and he shook when he handed me the keys. Not from age, he wasn't that old. More like nerves. He had a way of talking fast, like someone afraid of being interrupted. He told me the usual things. Trash chute at the end of the hall, laundry in the basement, maintenance requests on a slip of paper under his door. Then he stopped, cleared his throat, and leaned in closer. "One more thing," he said. His voice went soft. "Don't knock on 6B after midnight. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see." I gave him a look, waiting for the punchline. He didn't laugh. He just repeated it, slower this time. "Don't knock on 6B after midnight." I nodded just to get him off my back, but inside I was already rolling my eyes. Maybe it was a crazy tenant, maybe some recluse who worked night shifts and didn't want to be bothered. I didn't care. I had a door that locked and a place to sleep. That was enough. That night, I lay awake longer than I wanted, staring at the ceiling. My new neighbor's footsteps creaked above me. Pipes clanged like hollow bones. The city outside hummed with life. Then, faintly through the walls, knock, knock, 2 slow raps. Not at my door. Further down the hall, room 6B. I held my breath, and that's when I heard it, something inside knocking back. I told myself I imagined it. Old buildings echo, pipes bang. Neighbors slam doors at odd hours. It could have been anything, but deep down I knew it wasn't, because the knock had a rhythm, a pattern, like a conversation. Knock, knock, and the reply, softer, muffled, but definitely there, carried the same cadence. The next morning, in the gray light of my kitchen, I almost convinced myself it hadn't happened. But when I left for work and walked past 6B, I slowed down. The door was plain. Cheap wood, painted beige, the number peeling. No decorations, no welcome mat. But standing there, I felt the hair on my arms rise. Like the air in front of the door was heavier than the rest of the hallway. I didn't linger. Over the next week, I settled in. Work, home, sleep, repeat. But the knocks came back. Not every night, not at the same time. Just often enough that I started waiting for them. Always after midnight. 6B always answered. Once, I pressed my ear to my wall, straining. Please. I swear I heard a voice. Hoarse, tired, begging. I jerked back like I had been shocked. My heart was hammering so loud I thought someone would hear. The next day, I asked the landlord about it. He stiffened instantly. His hand trembled as he adjusted his glasses. Don't, he said. Don't talk about 6B. Don't think about it. Just leave it alone. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. His whole body told me enough. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a story. This was fear. That night, I locked my door twice. And at 12:17 a.m., someone started knocking again. But this time, it wasn't at 6B. It was at mine. The first knock was soft. So faint I thought I dreamed it. But then came the second. Louder. Closer. Knock. Knock. At my door. I froze in bed, covers bunched up under my chin. My phone glowed on a nightstand, but I didn't dare reach for it. The landlord's words pounded in my skull. Don't knock on 6B after midnight. He hadn't said anything about 6B knocking back. The third knock rattled the wood. A little longer, more impatient. I swallowed hard and forced myself to sit up. The apartment was dark except for the faint orange glow bleeding into the blinds. My throat was dry. My legs felt like cement. Hello? My voice cracked, thin and useless. Silence. I waited, heart thudding. Then, knock, 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 knock. Faster this time. I swung my legs over bed and crept toward the door, every step screaming, don't do this. The peephole was a black circle in the middle of the door. I hesitated, then pressed my eye against it. The hallway stretched empty. Shadows pulled in the corners. But there was no one outside, just the door to 6B. And as I stared, I saw the knob on 6B twitch. Just once, like someone had tried it and let go. I staggered back, breath sharp in my chest. Then, faintly, from behind that door, let me in. The next morning, I barely managed to drag myself out of bed. My eyes burned, my chest felt hollow, and I swore I could still hear the knocks echoing inside my skull. I wasn't going to say anything, not to anyone, but when I stepped into the hallway, I caught my neighbor across the way staring at 6B like it had just whispered her name. She was older, maybe late 50s, wiry gray hair pulled into a bun. She noticed me watching and quickly looked down at her grocery bags. You hear it too, she muttered. Not a question. I stopped. What? Her eyes flicked to the door, then back to me. The knocking. You heard it. I opened my mouth, closed it. She gave me a smile that wasn't really a smile at all. Don't answer. Don't speak to it. And whatever you do, don't knock back. Before I could respond, she slipped into her apartment and shut the door. That night, I stayed up again. Sat on my couch with the TV on mute. Tried to act like I wasn't waiting for it. 12:03, 12:11, 12:29. Then it came. Knock. Knock. At 6B. I held my breath. Silence stretched. And then a new sound. Knock. Knock. From the other side of my wall. Right where my head would have been if I had been lying in bed. I bolted upright, stumbling into the middle of the room, staring at the plaster like I could see through it. And in the silence that followed, I realized something that made my stomach twist. It wasn't trying to get out of 6B. It was trying to get in. The following day, I caught the landlord on the front steps, fumbling with his keys. You didn't tell me it knocks on other doors, I said before I could stop myself. He froze. His face drained like someone had pulled a plug. Don't. His voice cracked. He stepped closer, almost whispering. Don't talk about it out loud. Don't get your attention. That's what it wants. What's in there? I asked. He just shook his head, his eyes darting to the building like we were being watched. No one lives in 6B. No one's lived there for years. You understand? I wanted to press him, to demand an explanation. But his fear was so raw, so obvious, that I just nodded. That night, I tried to drown it out with music. Headphones in, volume up. Anything to stop me from listening for the inevitable. But when 12:20 came, I felt it anyway. The vibration through the floorboards. The rattle in the glass on the counter. Knock. Knock. even through the music, even through my own pulse. And then came the whisper, right against my wall. Please, I ripped the headphones off. My apartment was silent, the kind of silence that feels staged. Heavy, waiting, then knock, 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 knock. Relentless, violent, shaking my door in its frame. My heart slammed against my ribs. I backed into the kitchen, too scared to breathe, and then it stopped. The silence after was worse than the knocking. I crept back toward the peephole, every nerve screaming don't look. But I did, and this time I saw something. A hand, pale, too long, fingers splayed wide across the wood of 6BS door, pressing, trembling, and then slowly it knocked again, from the inside. I wasn't the only one losing sleep. By the end of that week, the whole floor looked like ghosts. Hollow eyes, jittery hands, doors opening and closing fast so no one had to linger in the hallway. Everyone knew about 6B. No one wanted to talk about it, except one. His name was Derek, early 20s, always smelled like weed, the kind of guy who thought rules were made just to see what happened when you broke them. He lived 2 doors down from me. I ran into him outside the building, both of us pretending not to look at the dark windows of 6B. You hear it too, huh? He said, smirking. Man, this place is weird. I'm gonna figure out what's in there. You shouldn't, I said, too fast. He grinned wider. Come on, dude. It's just some crazy old shut-in. What's the worst that happens? They yell at me? That night, I barely slept. At 12:15, the knocking started again, steady and patient. Knock, knock. But this time, footsteps joined it. Heavy, slow dragging, coming from Derek's apartment. My stomach dropped. I pressed my ear to the wall, every muscle tight. I heard him shuffle down the hall, muttering to himself, voice slurred with that lazy confidence only drunk idiots get. All right, let's see who's home. The knocks from 6B went silent, and then Derek knocked back. 3 sharp raps. Yo, open up. The hallway went dead quiet. Even the pipes stopped creaking. I held my breath. From behind 6BS door came the sound of something shifting. Slow, heavy, like furniture being dragged across concrete. Then a single knock in reply. Derek laughed. Oh, hell yeah. The knob turned. I didn't even know 6BS door could open. I'd never seen it move. But I heard the hinges scream. Felt the rush of air like the building itself exhaled. Derek's laugh cut off mid-breath. Silence. Then the door slammed shut, hard enough that my walls shook. I waited. 1 minute. 2. 5. Derek never came back. By morning, everyone knew. His door stood wide open, lights still on, TV humming to itself. Couch cushions tossed. A beer can tipped on the floor. But Derek was gone. No one said his name. No one wanted to. When the landlord came up, he didn't even bother stepping inside. Just looked once, pale and sweating, and pulled the door shut behind him. He didn't lock it, didn't put up a notice, just muttered, one less, like it was a number on a list. The cops never came. Nobody reported him missing. But that night, when the knocking started, it sounded different, heavier, louder, and underneath it, I could swear I heard a voice. Yo, open up, Derek's voice. I pressed both hands to my ears, rocking in bed, whispering to myself, it's not him, it's not him, it's not him. But the knocking followed me, through the wall, down the hall, at my door, and when I checked the peephole, I nearly screamed, because Derek was standing there, or something that looked like him. His face was wrong, the features blurred, smudged like wet paint, the eyes too wide and staring straight into the peephole. His body twitched like a puppet pulled by tangled strings. Let me in, bro, he croaked. It's cold. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. Then, from 6BS door came a sound like laughter. Low, hollow, and Derek, or what was left of him, jerked his head toward it before vanishing. Not walked away, not turned, vanished, like he'd been yanked backward through an invisible curtain. The hallway went empty again, and 6B stood quiet, waiting. I didn't wait until morning. I stormed straight down to the landlord's unit. fists pounding on his door until he cracked it open. His eyes were wild, sunken, like he hadn't slept in weeks. "You knew," I hissed. "You knew Derek was gone. What the hell is in there?" For a long moment, he just stared at me, lips trembling, hands gripping the frame like if it let go, he'd fall apart. Then, finally, he opened the door and motioned me inside. His apartment was bare. Too bare. No pictures, no books, no TV. Just a table, a chair, and a stack of worn notebooks. The blinds were nailed shut. He sat heavily in the chair, rubbing his temples. "You think I put up that rule for fun?" he said. His voice was low, bitter. "You think I like losing tenants?" I said nothing. He opened one of the notebooks, yellowed pages filled with cramped handwriting. The first entry was dated 1979. "It's been here longer than me," he said. "Longer than anyone alive now, I think. The man who owned this place before me warned me the same way I warned you. Don't knock. Don't answer. Don't listen. What is it?" He shook his head. "It's not a person. Not anymore. It wears people. Like clothes. That room. It's a door that shouldn't exist. And once it opens, someone always goes missing." I swallowed hard, while rising in my throat. "So why not brick it up? Burn the place down? Something." His eyes snapped to mine, sharp with a kind of desperate anger. "You think I haven't tried? You think others haven't? Every time someone interferes, it spreads. Once it was just 6B, then it was a whole floor, then the building across the street. Always knocking, always asking, always waiting for someone dumb enough to open the door." He leaned forward, gripping my wrist so tight it hurt. "Don't be that someone. Do you understand me? Don't be the one who breaks the rule." I yanked free, my heart hammering, because I couldn't tell him that the rule was already broken, and it was still knocking. That night, I tried everything. Headphones, sleeping pills, even stuffing towels under the door, but nothing dulled it. The knocks came sharper, closer, hungrier. Knock, knock, knock. Each one rattled the picture frames on my wall, shook dust from the ceiling. It wasn't just 6B anymore. The sound was everywhere, above me, beneath me, inside me. And then, at 12:47, my doorknob turned. I bolted upright in bed. My door shuddered, as if someone were trying to twist it off its hinges. I staggered into the living room, every nerve screaming. The peephole showed only darkness. Not shadows, not an empty hall, just black, like the other side of my door had been swallowed. Then I heard it. "Please, it's cold." Derek's voice, thin, warped, coming from everywhere at once. I stumbled back straight into the wall, and the wall knocked back, 3 booming raps, inches from my spine. I couldn't take it anymore. The fear, the sleepless nights, the constant waiting for the next sound. I had to end it. Before I could talk myself out of it, I ripped open my door and staggered into the hallway. It was empty, except for 6B. Its door was wide open. A black void yawned beyond it, swallowing the flickering light of the hallway. The edges of the frame seemed to breathe, warping with every exhale. And inside the dark, something moved. Slowly, too slowly. A shape stretched thin, like a man drawn in charcoal and smudged by a careless hand. Its limbs bent wrong. Its head lolled as though the neck was broken. And its hands were pressed flat against the inside of the doorway, long fingers curling along the frame. It leaned forward, and I swear I heard every neighbor's voice whispering in unison. "Knock, knock." The sound echoed in my skull, vibrating my teeth. Then, all at once, every door on the floor flew open, and in every doorway stood another shape, each one wearing the blurred, shifting face of someone I hadn't seen in days. Derek, the old woman, tenants who'd vanished without notice, all of them staring at me, all of them whispering together, "Let us in." I don't remember how long I stood there. Seconds, hours. Time bent in that hallway, stretched in until it snapped. The figures didn't move closer. They just waited, patient, smiling faces that weren't faces at all, shifting like reflections on black water. I backed into my apartment, and slammed the door, locked it, shoved the dresser in front. My heart jackhammered against my ribs. My breath came in shallow gasps, but the knocks followed, from the walls, the ceiling, the floor, 1,000 knuckles rapping in perfect unison. I don't sleep anymore. Not really. I close my eyes, but I still hear it. Every night. Louder, heavier, closer. The landlord hasn't been seen in days. His door is wide open. The notebooks scattered on the floor like someone rifled through them in a hurry. The last page just says, if you're reading this, it's already too late. I think he's right. Because last night, something changed. The knocks didn't come from 6B. They came from inside my apartment. The kitchen cupboard. The bathroom mirror. The closet door. Knock. Knock. I don't know how long I can last. The walls feel thinner every hour. The air heavier. Like the building itself is hollow. Waiting to cave in. I'm writing this because maybe, just maybe if I tell someone, if I put it into words, it won't get any closer. But even as I type, I can see the shadows stretching across the floor. Long fingers curling toward my chair. And somewhere very close to my ear, a voice is whispering the same 2 words over and over. Knock, knock. Story 8. My mother. And I never had a normal relationship. But now, I went too far. In the shadows of my childhood home. Within the walls that keep all my secrets. I have to face something I thought would come later. She was always very active. And by that I don't mean she treated her body like a temple. I'd even say the opposite. She made use of the vessel she was given, and made sure to return it well worn. Her mind was always sharp, probably the most intelligent woman I ever met. For better or worse, that marked my destiny from the day I arrived screaming and kicking, held in her arms, covered in her blood. My mother was an imposing woman, with a strong character and very strict. I wish I could tell you something about my father, but I don't know him. You're an exact copy of him. Unfortunately, you also inherited his charm, she would say. She always told me he was a hopeless idiot, but she didn't want to follow that path. Every week she gave me a book to read, and on Sunday night she tested me. The books grew harder week after week, with no breaks for holidays. If I failed, the punishment was harsh. But the reward I got when I passed made me forget any correction. That demand paid off. I grew up to be a writer with moderate success, a comfortable living, and the respect of my peers. So what's the downside? What's wrong with it? I'm condemned to keep up the act for the rest of my life. Before leaving home, I have to put on my disguise of a normal person, adjust a mask so it doesn't fall and reveal my deformity to others. Only the night and the monsters that live in it, those of us who live in it, have the stomach to look me in the face, to caress it, to kiss it. They understand me. And it's not just because of the reward I leave on the nightstand. I'm not that naive. I know there is enough money or jewels to buy what I desire. Something sacred, meant only for those who know nothing of good or evil, for the truly pure heart. With the years, my deformity grew like a tumor feeding on my shame and misery, caused by itself. It was no longer just about recreating and getting what my mother no longer gave me. It went further. I crossed a line. There, where my fetishized fantasy met my hatred and contempt, they mixed like blood and mother's milk over the belly of that woman, in that forgotten hotel up north. And today, as my mother needs my attention and care, the way she once gave me hers, I can't give it. It's too late. The tumor has long metastasized, spread to my whole body, and any trace of humanity is gone. My deformity is exposed. And now, the hundreds of books we read, the body that gave me life, and this sickness will be nothing more than food for moths and flies. Story 9. I was kidnapped by a man who followed orders from a voice. I woke up in the dark, gag in my mouth, the sick stench of chloroform twisting my stomach. I was lying in what looked like a basement, only a thin crack of light coming through, everything old and damp. Even through the haze, I recognized the figure in front of me as the Uber driver who had picked me up from home. Tall man, broad shoulders, long jaw. The first thing out of my mouth when he took the gag off was, "What do you want from me?" "I just need to keep you here," he said, voice shaky, uneven. "Pan made me. Don't blame me, Ms. Sarah. Please." Tears streamed down his face. Before I could ask another question, he slammed the heavy metal door shut, locking me in. That first week, every time he came down with food or swapped out the bucket, I begged him to let me go. He never answered, just gave me that sad look, sometimes even crying. His arms and neck had fresh wounds, ones I figured he'd done to himself. Every night I heard him upstairs, yelling at no one, banging the walls. It was clear something in his mind was broken. By the second week, I tried getting through to the part of him that pitted me. He didn't look at me with hate, more like he was stuck in something he couldn't control. I told him I'd forget about the kidnapping, that I'd visit, talk to him, help him figure out what he was going through. He thanked me, but said it wasn't possible. Pan, the voice in his head, was in love with me. Pan wanted me close, and if he disobeyed, he'd be punished. I asked him how long would it take, and he said he didn't know. When I pressed him more about this Pan, he pulled away. I caught sight of the scratches on his arms as he stood. He muttered an apology through tears and left me alone again. That's when I knew I couldn't count on his pity. His madness could kill me at any moment. I was small, weak, no match for him physically, but I had to try. In the third week, I faked a sharp pain in my stomach. My plan was to act like I had appendicitis. Hearing my screams, he rushed down to check on me. He asked to see my stomach. I let him lean close. When his head was near enough, I swung the hammer I had hidden away after he had let me use his bathroom for a shower. The first hit barely fazed him. He froze, eyes wide with shock. I swung again, same spot. This time he collapsed, screaming, clutching his head. It was my chance. I bolted the door, slammed it shut, and locked him inside. His muffled cries echoed behind me. Night was falling. His house was a creaky old cabin, dim lights, rotting wood. On my way out, I understood the noises I'd heard every night. The walls were carved with symbols, marks I couldn't make sense of. What I didn't notice was the red everywhere. My hand was already on the doorknob to the front door when I heard a strange bleat. I turned and saw a goat standing there in the living room. He was white and black. It didn't move, just stared at me like it knew something I didn't. Every now and then it let out another weak cry. His eyes locked on mine so intensely, I felt almost hypnotized by that animal, staring back for a few seconds. What snapped me out of it was when he suddenly rose on his front legs and began what I can only describe as a grotesque metamorphosis. Something I'll never get out of my head. His body twisted, his hooves stretched and reshaped into arms, his torso shifting as he screamed. Not an animal's cry, but the sound of someone trapped in unbearable pain. That was when panic finally hit me. I bolted to the house and out the door, sprinting down the dirt road in pure desperation until I reached a busy street, where a family stopped their car and called the police. That same night, 3 patrol cars went out to the cabin. The goat was nowhere to be found. All they discovered was the man who had kept me prisoner. His body was torn apart, his inside scattered across the basement where I had locked him. No investigator ever explained how that happened. As for me, I'm trying to live my life again. I'm in therapy, on meds to handle the panic attacks that came after it all. But the hardest part is still sleeping. Every night I wake up, sweating, haunted by that scream. Story 10. My roommate wasn't human. I moved out to escape. You ever had a ghost for a roommate? No, I'm dead serious. Like, actually paying rent, living your broke early 20s life. Sharing a crusty 2-bedroom in downtown Toronto, and your roommate's a fucking ghost. Yeah, welcome to my hell. So, I just moved into this old-ass 3rd floor walk-up. Creaky stairs, sketchy plumbing, fridge that groaned like it had trauma. But it was cheap, and I was desperate. I was doing freelance gigs back then, editing wedding videos and designing logos for people who'd ghost me before payment. Ironic now, I guess. Couldn't afford to move again, even if the walls started bleeding. At first, it was kind of funny. My roommate Mike, I'd known him since college, came out of his room one morning looking like he hadn't slept. "You pacing the hallway last night?" he asked, eyes half dead. "And what was with the knocking on the wall?" I blinked at him. I was asleep, man. I didn't do any pacing. He just kind of shrugged, said, "Maybe it was the neighbors. Paper-thin walls. Old buildings, you know how it is?" Except it wasn't. It kept happening. Almost every night. Mike would bitch about the thuds, the knocks, the footsteps crossing the apartment at 3 a.m. sharp, like a goddamn drill sergeant doing laps. I laughed it off until I started waking up to the same shit. Pacing. Scratching. That's when I noticed the smell. It was always in my room. Always around 2 or 3 a.m. This thick, disgusting mix of cheap, powdery floral perfume and damp rot. Like someone poured an entire bottle of dollar store body spray on a pile of moldy clothes in a litter box. I get this wave of dread like pure cortisol about 10 seconds before the smell hit. Every time. Like my body knew something was coming. Like it was warning me. Mike bailed 4 months in. Couldn't take it anymore. Said he needed to clear his head and moved in with his girlfriend. Left me hanging with the whole rent. So now I'm living alone in that haunted, reeking hellhole with no money and a fridge full of expired oat milk. I figured, screw it. Maybe the bad vibes were tied to my room. Not his. Worth a shot, right? The very first night I slept in his former room, I had an incredibly detailed and realistic nightmare. A nightmare so vivid I still get cold thinking about it. In the dream, I'm standing in the bathroom. Lights dim, flickering. The mirror is cracked from corner to corner, like a spider web across glass. I'm holding this jagged shard of mirror in my hand, and I start cutting. My own face. Over and over. Just slicing, not screaming, just watching. I woke up in a full sweat, heart punching through my ribs, and my hands were shaking so bad, I knocked over the lamp to try to turn it on. That was the start of the worst stretch of my life. Loud bangs in the walls. Toilet flushing by itself. Water turning on in the bathtub. Full fucking blast. At 2:47 a.m. like clockwork. Always 2:47. Why that time? No clue. Maybe that's when it died. Maybe that's when it woke up. The night that broke me wasn't the blood dreams or the smell, or even the footsteps. It was the TV. I just rapped a long gig. Brain fried, nerve shot. I got home, microwave leftover pierogies, and crawled into bed. The apartment felt off that night, like walking into a room right after a huge argument. Air was heavy, tense. I chalked it up to anxiety. Had been having a lot of that lately. I flipped on the TV. Some grainy old black and white horror flick was playing. Comfort noise. I watched for a bit, then clicked the remote off, placed it on the nightstand right next to my head, and rolled over. Woke up to blaring sound and flashing light. Cartoons. Full volume. The screen practically lighting up the entire room. My first thought was that I must have fallen asleep before turning it off, until I checked my phone. Only 45 minutes had passed. Okay, maybe I did forget. I clicked the remote again, shut off, and this time placed it on the dresser. Farther away, just to be sure. Rolled back into bed. Dozed off again. Then came the voices. Not TV voices. Human ones. Talking. Too loud. Like a dinner scene from a soap opera. People arguing. Laughing. I bolted upright. The TV was back on. Different channel. Different show. Some old dinner party movie. Everyone around a long table, talking in circles. The music was a soft horror build. Screeching strings, pulsing drums. Not the channel I'd left it on. Not the show I was watching. I reached out for the remote, heart thudding. My hand hit wood. Nothing there. I scrambled up, pulling my phone light. Remote was gone. I scanned the room, then spotted it, lying on the floor in a straight line between me and the door, as if something had placed it there. I didn't even process it. I just jumped up, ran to the light switch, flipped it on. TV volume? Maxed out. 100%. Blasting. I turned it down manually, hand trembling, and when I finally got the remote and turned the TV off for the third time, I noticed the weirdest thing. The TV menu was set to input from a DVD player. I didn't own a DVD player. That night, I slept on the couch like a coward. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself again in that mirror, grinning as I sliced my own cheek open. The couch was no better, by the way. Around 4:13 a.m., the water in the kitchen sink turned on by itself. I moved out 2 weeks later. Left a bunch of my stuff behind. Didn't care. I even told the new tenant when they were touring the place, "Hey, this apartment's a little weird at night." They laughed. I didn't. You ever feel like something wants you to stay? Like it's trying to break you down so you can't leave? Yeah, that apartment wanted me. Bad. But I left. And sometimes when I jolt awake around midnight, heart racing for no reason, I swear I catch a whiff of that same cheap perfume, the one that clung to the walls, and hear the faint rattle of old pipes that shouldn't be in this building. I tell myself it's just memories messing with me, nightmares left behind. But deep down, a part of me wonders, what if that apartment never really let me go? What if it's still out there, still waiting? Maybe still looking for a new roommate